Okay, great. And I will also share my screen. Okay, I hope everybody can see my screen now. It should have the first slide for our presentation. Okay, well, I'm going to get started. And so I just want to say welcome everyone to the TGfU 40th anniversary webinar series, Introduction to Games-Based Approaches. And so this is a session that's going to be focused on giving an overview of the critical components of games-based approaches. So my name is Jennie Petersen, and I represent Canada on the TGfU, or Teaching Games for Understanding, special interest group and the International Advisory Board. So we're going to have a question and answer period at the end, just so you know. If you have any questions on the presentation, you can put those in the chat, and then we'll make sure we try to go through those at the very end when we get to the question and answer session. So, all right. Yeah, so welcome everyone. So Teaching Games for Understanding Special Interest Group is a worldwide organization that is represented by different experts all across the world. And we're very excited to have so many of you joining us today. We recognize there's a huge international presence out there, so welcome. This is the plan here up on the screen for this session today. And so we're going to start by giving an introduction of the Teaching Games for Understanding International Advisory Board. So we definitely have some acronyms in this presentation: Teaching Games for Understanding. Also, we use the acronym TGfU. And then you'll also hear us refer to the International Advisory Board, which we've used an acronym IAB at times. So, so we're going to start off with giving an overview. So once I explain briefly what the Understanding International Advisory Board is, we'll move into an overview of the webinar series, and then we'll spend most of the time actually going through the content for seminar number one. Seminar number one, we're going to talk about, give an overview of games-based approaches, and we're going to go through the 5 key components of games-based approaches, which you might know there's this is a webinar series. And so the other topics that are going to be covered in the following webinars are actually the key components we're going to briefly go over today. So you can get a glimpse of what we're going to start to talk about in those sessions. So here, so for today, sorry, my thing. So the webinar series, as I briefly mentioned, is organized by the Teaching Games for Understanding, or TGfU International Advisory Board members. The IAB is a group of TGfU experts that comes from 23 different countries across the world. And we meet regularly and have been working on various projects and initiatives to promote TGfU and educate people on TGfU, as well as conduct collaborative research at times as well. And we have a link there on the screen if you are interested in finding out more information about what we do and what we are. So these are our presenters for today. So, so I guess I'll start off with introducing myself briefly, and then I'll introduce everyone that's going to be speaking today. So, like I said, I'm from Canada, and I recently completed my PhD at Brock University, and I now work for the city of Calgary in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So the next person I have on our screen here, Naoki Suzuki from Japan. He is an associate professor of physical education at Tokyo, Gakuge University in Japan. I'm sorry, Naoki, I probably did not pronounce that correctly. He has an interest in teaching and researching physical education and teacher training, and is trying to incorporate ICT into physical education based on his previous research. Sanmuga, next on here, is from Malaysia and is a senior lecturer in the Department of Sports Science and Coaching at Sultan Idris Education University. He served as a school teacher for more than 20 years before becoming a senior lecturer in 2008. And he's the IAB representative for Malaysia. So, here we go. We have Francesco from Italy, who is an associate professor of sports science in the Faculty of Human and Society Sciences at the University of Enna in Italy. His research interests are focused on using games-based approaches, especially the tactical games model, in a physical education context and on the assessment of human movement and sport performances. And then we have Guy from Brazil. Hello to Guy. And so Guy is a professor of the postgraduate program in movement sciences, physiotherapy, and dance at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. His main research topics are sport pedagogy, pedagogical practice, games-based approaches, sports, invasion sports, and athletics. And then we have David from Spain. David is a full professor in the Faculty of Education of, Ciudad Real at University Castilla-La Mancha. So sorry, I should be practicing here. You can say this for me, David. Clearly, we need some practice. His research focuses on model-based physical education, primarily TGfU and sport education, and on the increase of movement time during the school day to improve children's school wellness. So, and then we have Kanae from, and so Kanae represents the university, at the USA on the IAB board. And she's also an associate professor at Western Colorado University, and has been a huge help in putting this all together today. So, okay, let's move on to our next slide. So the webinar series that this is being kicked off today at this first session is intended for physical education teachers and sports coaches who are new to games-based approaches. And the goal of this 4-seminar series is to provide introductory information about the basic pedagogical strategies and principles of games-based approaches. And so on the screen here to the on the right side of the screen, you're going to see the 4 seminar dates. So obviously today is the first one, seminar number 1. We also have 3 others that are going to follow today, and the dates are listed here on the screen for your information. And all sessions, just so you know, are going to be at the same time going forth. So this slide here, I'm going to now just briefly go over what's the plan for the session number 1. So we kind of covered off the introductory components. We're going to start by going over the consensus statement that we've created as the TGfU Special Interest Group, or IAB. Then we're going to talk about what is a games-based approach, or GBA, because we're going to reference that for short. And then we'll go over the 5 critical components. And so like I said, the 5 critical components also align with the webinar topics that follow this session today. And so the one thing that's actually important to note is that these are steps that have a kind of a sequential order to them. And so the first step, one up on the screen there, tactical concepts and problems. This is all these 5 concepts that are on the screen are common to games-based approaches. So the first one that here, they're all centered around tactical concepts and problems. So all games-based approaches use tactical concepts and problems as part of their lesson planning, and we're going to cover that in more detail. The second piece here, games modifications. All games approaches also modify games to adapt to the needs and abilities of the groups they're working with. The third component, using question and reflection throughout a lesson, is another critical component. Then number 4, use of authentic gameplay and assessment is the 4th critical component. And then last but not least, lesson planning. And the way that a lesson flows is another unique aspect of games-based approaches that we're going to talk about today. So these 5 steps here, I mentioned briefly that the sequence of them, or their order, is actually quite important. And in terms of how they're applied, so this is important to note. And so when you typically start planning a lesson for a games-based approach, you would start by focusing on one particular tactical concept or problem. From there, you would create a modified game structure that helps emphasize the concept you're focusing on. And then you would embed questions for intentional reflection about the tactical concept after a modified game. Then when you're thinking about how to evaluate or measure success amongst students or participants, you also want to set up an authentic gameplay scenario for the assessment. Finally, the last critical component, lesson planning. This is a critical piece as well, because it really brings all the concepts together. The critical components really come together. And so that'll be the last webinar that we cover in this series. And so the lesson plan is actually quite critical because it ensures there's congruency across all of the critical components. Okay, so the consensus statement. So you may have noticed in this webinar that you've heard reference to both games-based approaches, or GBA, as well as TGfU, or Teaching Games for Understanding. And so terminology can be confusing. And so another piece of work that the TGfU IAB has recently led is the development of a consensus statement to try to create consistency in the terms used by shifting to the term games-based approaches. And this term encompasses a number of different models and terms, and these terms get used in different countries. So we're trying to encourage a shift towards using games-based approaches to help create common understanding. So I'm going to read out the statement. So the first part of the statement is actually up here on the screen right now. And so it says, in order to promote terminological consistency among researchers and practitioners, we suggest the use of games-based approach to refer to the learner-centered teaching and coaching practice in which the modified games set the base and framework for developing thoughtful, creative, intelligent, and skillful players. And the second part of that consensus statement is up here now. We also encourage the use of games-based approaches to refer to several well-established approaches that follow a GBA, such as TGfU, Game Sense, Play Practice, Tactical Games Model, Ball School, Invasion Games Competence Model, and other similar proposals. And so all of these different names that you see on the screen that I just listed have similar components and critical components, which we're going to run through today. And so I'm now going to pass it over to Sanmuga, who is going to provide an overview of games-based approaches and make a comparison with the traditional approach to teaching games and sports.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, Jennie, for your kind introduction. Okay, my slot for today is I'm going to explain the difference or the comparison between the traditional approach of teaching sports and games, termed as skill-based approach or technical model, versus the evergreen model game teaching of today, game-based approach. Before we dive in about the differences between these two models, I would like to highlight one must understand the importance of closed skill and open skill approaches in sports and game. Closed skill, we are referring to when teaching track and field, gymnastics is based on closed skill. Closed skill, they focus on skill mastery. This is very crucial. And then tactical decision making taking a backseat. Apart from what is important in the closed skill, the teacher or coach should emphasize a proper teaching technical skills. The tactics is missing here, right? Whereas the open skill like games, what is crucial apart from fitness, apart from mental strength, apart from technical mastery, tactical decision making is very, very crucial. The players know what to do, whether in a sense of a football game, for example, the player or the student must understand when to dribble, when to pass, what to do, how to do. So I suppose GBA, game-based approach, is more suitable in teaching games compared to closed skill. I propose technical model or skill-based approach is more appropriate. Right, now we compare the figure, two figures. I already highlighted two figures. One figure is a traditional skill-based or technical model picture, and then another picture is a game-based approach focusing on TGfU variation. Okay, right. Okay, look at the technical model lesson structure. It is a linear teaching approach. First of all, the teacher will introduce the topic. For example, I'm using the topic dribbling in soccer. Teacher will introduce. Today, we are going to learn about dribbling skill in soccer. That is the lesson objective. And the teacher will start the class with warming up, traditional warming up activities for soccer. For example, jogging, and then the juggling with the ball and some little soccer drills. And then Follow the second step, the teacher will assemble all the students. The teacher will demo the skill of, for example, skill of dribbling. The teacher will demo. At times, teacher might use task card and then using some teaching aid to help the student to understand the skill of dribbling, for example. And then after explanation and demonstration of dribbling activity, the teacher will organize the student in pairs, as an individual or in group to do drills. Example here, we do dribbling drills. All right, and then the teacher can use passive and active dribbling drills. At times, teacher can recapitulate whatever they have studied earlier, other drills they have done earlier, maybe passing, whatever it is. They also do the drills at this stage. After doing all kind of drills, the teacher will organize modified game or full game so that the student or the players can utilize all the skill, whatever they have learned in the modified game or full game. And eventually the limbering down and pulling down activities, maybe teacher ending up with pull down activity, the teacher will give them some info about whatever skill have they learned. That is in terms of reflection. Whereby next figure is a game-based approach. Game-based approach is more indirect approach. There is indirect instruction. Teacher introduced the topic of dribbling indirectly. Maybe the teacher will show video, or for example, as a set induction teacher, the teacher will show video or picture, for example, Lionel Messi. And then the teacher will prompt the student, ask them to guess what are the qualities Lionel Messi have. And then the student might answer, oh, Lionel Messi is good in dribbling. Therefore, the teacher will start the lesson. Today, we are going to learn about dribbling skill in soccer. That as an introduction, indirect introduction. And then followed by warming up activity, game-based warming up activity. Teacher might introduce 1 versus 1 using modified ball, modified area, and stretching as a part of game-based warming up activities. And then followed up, the teacher will call all the students to assemble. The second step, the teacher will discuss about tactical component by using guided discovery approach. Teacher will ask, for example, when do you use dribble? The student might answer, we'll dribble when there is no opponent to shoot goal. When do you pass? There are a lot of opponents there, we will pass the ball so that our teammate will open space to receive the ball, and then we will possess the ball in order for attacking strategy. So this kind of thing the teacher will discuss with student. And then after discussing tactical components, teacher will set gameplay 1, whereby the student will apply whatever tactical component they learn, apply in the game situation 1, whereby the student will apply tactical component of thinking. All right. After maybe playing 7 to 10 minutes, the teacher will call them back, and then the teacher will discuss about skills. For example, dribbling skill. What type of dribbling skills in soccer? Maybe soul dribble or instep and all that. And then the student again will play gameplay 2, whereby they apply this dribbling skill in gameplay 2. And then prior to that, the teacher will do some drill so that the student can possess dribbling skills. Then the third, followed by the third gameplay 3, there's a cumulative activity whereby the student will apply all the tactical element they have learned and then skill they have learned in a higher intensity gameplay 3, whereby this time the teacher can have 4x4, 4 versus 4 with 4 goal mouth. So in this particular gameplay 3, teacher can do a holistic, authentic assessment. Teacher can measure in terms of psychomotor skill, in terms of dribbling, cognitive skill, tactical decision making, and whether they cooperate one another in terms of affective domain. And then lastly, cooling down, limbering down, and reflection. So this is a general example, the differences between a game-based approach versus the traditional skill-based approach. Next slide, please. All right, here I highlighted some characteristic of a traditional skill-based approach. It is a linear type of teaching. Teacher will start with warm-up, skill development, modified game, and then the full game. The philosophy underpinning a traditional skill-based approach, the student or the players must possess fundamental motor skill and specific skill before they are allowed to play game. They must acquire fundamental motor skills and sport-specific skill like dribbling before they are allowed to play game. All right, next point is that student allowed to play a game unless they acquire all the skills, and then they're allowed to play a gameplay. Assessment procedure is isolation. The teacher only assess their the technical skill in isolation. The student allowed to do individual, maybe dribbling, and then the teacher will assess them, and teacher might give them marks, whatever it is. It is not in the game context, whereas GBA assessment in the game context. Traditional approach to be more teacher-centered. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a continuation of skill-based approach. Teacher general in the skill-based approach, teacher make all the decision. Teacher move from demonstration to skill drill to another skill drill and finally gameplay. The traditional approach focus on technical mastery. It is not the technical knowledge taking backseat. Next, this model has been criticized and outdated for teaching games. However, this model is still preferred by the teacher when other models unsuccessful or they don't have time, they apply this technical model or skill-based approach, whereby game-based approach takes a lot of time, planning, and so on. However, this technical model or skill-based approach until today is very useful. Research finding indicated this model is still important for skill development, especially for close-scale games, close-scale sports such as track and field, gymnastics, and so on. Next slide, please. All right. Finally, I like to highlight the characteristic of game-based approach. Okay, game-based approach. It has been played in a game situation. From one situation to another situation. First game situation, maybe the student will apply tactical element, and next game situation, they apply a skill element, and then finally a third activity situation with accumulation of tactics and skill. Okay, it is hypothesized that after completing a game situation, the student will improve in their tactical component and skill execution. The game-based approach, learning takes place in a game contextual, meaning to say that using game situation, the student will learn tactics and skill in the game situation. The role of teacher is as a facilitator. The teacher will use a discussion in terms of guided discovery to probe a student tactical knowledge and then technical skill knowledge, and then implement it in the gameplay situations. However, the biggest problem of GBA, teacher need planning. Teacher and coaches need planning, and it time consuming. If no proper planning, GBA approach can be haywire. Okay, and then as for the coaches, if you want to use the game-based approach, you can use game-based approach, but whatever it is, you got to incorporate with fitness component and mental strength. So to be more viable for the coaches, GBA be more viable to the coaches. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, hello everybody. Good night from Spain. Well, let's see. Sometimes we miss to send a clear imagine a picture of what we are talking about, and it's very interesting to know if to think about a situation. Will you recognize a GBA lesson if you saw it? If somebody in the next course, in the next gymnasium is teaching with this approach, well, if you're watching a GBA or TGfU teaching in practice, you will see small games. You will see most of the time kids or players actually playing. You will see somebody that could be doing questioning and answering, but the rest of the group normally is still playing and working alone. And the teacher is walking around the lesson, normally don't stop and gather all the group together. So this is like a very dynamic situation and very normally in small groups. So that could be a general picture if we are watching a GBA lesson or practice. Next slide, please, Jennie. So another example, more visual. That could you play the video, please? Just for a while. This is a video that Alan Turner sent to our seminar 2 years ago as a good example of TGfU lesson. I have to remember that TGfU is one of the original and the main game-based approach. And then you can see what I said before, small groups, some questioning at the beginning, some reflections, a small practice, reflect through the practice. Sometimes you have to do some drills, but all of that are based on the modified based on the game. On the left side of the slide, you can see 10 components that you can. It's a proposal from Butler that if you see a lesson, you have to recognize these components, like start with modified games, observe the games, effectively emphasize play, and so on. Sometimes you don't have to have all that components in your lessons, but most of them are in most of the lesson of a TGfU or game-based approach. So that could be a good idea to think about what is game-based approach in practice. So next slide, please. So as Jennie said at the beginning, we are working in the 5 critical components of GBA. In the International Advisory Board, we are working on not only to identify what are critical components, because this is well set in the literature through different names like benchmarks or other names, but we try to identify in which through which components, main components, a coach and a teacher should be better trained. So, and in which order? So we set through different meetings that this proposal of 5 lessons will be also 5 steps to train a beginner teacher in GBA or coach. So next slide, please. In these 5 steps or topics, the first would be tactical concepts and problems. And this will be the 2 topics that will be addressed in the next webinar. So what is tactical concept and problems, and what do we mean about this? So for teachers to begin to use this approach, the first question should be to understand that games are a set of tactical problems instead of a group of skills that have to be practiced in advance and then put together in the game. So if you understand that you are facing a tactical situation or a problematic situation, then you need to understand it. And then you begin to know how to use the different tools. In this case, these are the skills. So when we are understanding this in games, we are also able to group in a different way these games. So from this understanding of tactical problems that are the base of the games, we can find different categories. So next slide, please. There are different proposals of categories, and this is the most well-known. Len Almond in the 86 proposed this category based on different ones said before: target games, tricking and fielding, net and wall, and invasion games. All of them in the same category share the same tactical problems that can be solved through very similar strategies. So next slide, please. if we see different games, like for example, in invasion games, we can use our hands, our feet, or even some implements, like in lacrosse or hockey, but we are trying to solve the same problems. Same thing happens in net and wall. For example, we are playing paddle or volleyball or tennis and so on in striking and fielding or target. So next slide, please. Very quickly, I will try to give some examples to the better understanding of this. What is a tactical problem and how is that important in different categories? This, as I have to remember that this is in 2 weeks, we will have a webinar focused on this matter. So in invasion games, we have 3 offense tactical problems and 3 defense tactical problems. This is a proposal, of course, a different one, but this is very basic and very, I would say, globally agreed in the community of game-based approach. So when we are, the first tactical problem is keeping possession of the ball. And if we are in defense, there's a complementary tactical problem, which is winning the ball. In the picture, we can see that if we want to play and we want to win the game, and doing that, we have to solve the main problem, which is scoring. Firstly, we have to have the ball. Once we have it, we need to keep it. And if we don't have it, we want to win it, or we need to win it in order to win the game. Next slide. Once we've solved the first tactical problem, our problem is to approach the goal, progress in space, and to be close to the next goal, close to have the chance to score. Again, in defense, it's in the mirroring tactical problem, which is defending the space, prevent the progression of the other team. Next slide. So if we solve these 2 first tactical problems, we are facing the last of the third, which is scoring in offense and defending the goal in defense. Every tactical problem has different tools, instruments, in this case, skills, to solve it. If I want to score in basketball, I had to shoot the ball. If I had to score in tennis, I can do a drop or smash or all kind of strokes. So, but firstly, all kind of skills are framed into different tactical problems. So next slide, please. Next example is another category is net and wall tactical problems. Here, one of the proposals of different problems are that in the first tactical problems is common in offense and defense, which is keep the ball in play. If we don't keep the ball in play, the game is over. Okay, in football, if we don't have the ball and we lost it, or the game is going on, but once the ball is not in play in net and wall, the game is stopped. So once we keep the ball in play, we're playing. If we are in offense, we need to keep the initiative. Normally, we are winning the situation. We are moving our country, but again, in the mirror of defense, we want to recover the initiative. So we have, again, different skills to solve these tactical problems. Normally, the third tactical problem is get the points. Once we give the initiative, then we try to get the point. But it's a different situation, different strategies to different, like in invasion games, because we have the possession of the ball doesn't set the full game in terms of offense or defense. So different categories have different problematics to solve and to understand tactical problems. Because of that, it's very important to set the categories and the tactical problems, understand them within that categories. So next slide, please. So as an example, we can have here tennis on the left and paddle on the right. And if we understand the tactical problems, tennis is very difficult to keep the ball in play because we have a very big racket and we hit very strong the ball. And get the point, on the contrary, is quite easy. Both by getting the point or lose it because we miss the stroke. On the contrary, we have paddle, which use walls, and then you can use the rebound. You use a paddle, which is a short and thick racket, and the game is slower and easier. So keep the ball in play is quite easy. Because of that, it's much easier to begin to play and enjoy it. On the contrary, get the point in paddle is more difficult. So it's different, the same tactical problems, but different characteristics depending on the rules of each game. So we have to understand, first we have to understand the tactical problems and to address them in different games to have a full range of experience. Okay, here is I end my participation. So I wait you in the next seminars. We will get these tactical problems and concepts in deep. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. I'm from Brazil here. I'm Gui, and I'm going to talk about the topic 2, the game modification. And so the first thing, just a minute. Yes, here. So I'm going to talk about one of the characteristics of game-based approach, the game modification. So the first thing, why do we have to modify some game? So although there are other reasons and possibilities, I will present here 2 of the main modifications characteristics of game-based approach: game representation and game exaggeration. In the first possibility, we modify it to make the game possible or to make it playable. So then participants could play. The other one, game exaggeration, we modify to emphasize or get focus on a particular teaching purpose. And the other question is, how can we modify the game? Basically, we can have the following changes in a game: modify the rules, modify the number of players, modify the space, the playing area, modify the game equipment, and modify the way we score or we can score in a game. Next slide, please, Jennie. So some example about the game representation to make it playable. I will now exemplify and explain this game representation. The main goal of this modification is to make the game playable for participants, for learners. Let's take the example of tennis. David talked before the difficult to play, how difficult it is to play a tennis. So imagine a class of children who are just starting to learn tennis, the game of tennis. How can we use the game to teach? Tennis is a hard sport to learn. The court is very big, and we have to, it's not an easy game for starters. So surely children will find very difficult to play. So me as a teacher need to make some changes and to make the game playable for these children, these kids. And how can I make this? Modifying the game, for example, using softer balls and slower balls, which allow children time to reach the ball and adjust the body to hit this ball. We also can use a smaller court because the official court will require a lot of power for the kids to hit this ball. We also can modify the rules, changing, for example, the counting, the form of counting, which can be very difficult at this age and for starters. Or even allowing, in some cases, children to catch and throw the ball, because hit the ball with the racket could be very difficult for them. The other possibility is to hit with the hands instead of hitting with a racket. Also, we can modify the equipment, such a smaller or adapted racket. The picture below shows a racket made of cardboard, which we call here in Brazil a hand racket. So it looks like a palm and make it easier for the children to hit. Next slide, please, Jennie. I don't know if yes, here is two pictures as an example of this hand racket that children could use to hit the ball instead of using a racket. Next slide, please. So here is other slide that we can see some other examples and ways to modify the game as a game representation. In the first picture, there is a foam ball being used for adult women beginners in tennis. Notice that in the picture, two women play with each other without a net. Was another modification made to make the game playable for them. In the other picture, it's possible to observe a tennis class for children in a mini court, which is easier for these kids. And the third picture shows a group of teachers playing a modified form of representation. A rubber band divides a school court, forming 5 mini courts of tennis. Improvised mini courts, okay? So the ball used was also adapted, lighter and slower. It's the blue ball there on the picture, allowing beginners time to adjust, hit, and play. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to explain a little bit about another way to modify the game, the modification by exaggeration. The goal is to modify the game to emphasize something we want to teach. Let's look at this example, a class of invasion games in which the focus is on teaching attacker without the ball to appear and receive the ball. Also create pass line and support the attacker with the ball. In this case, we can create a game in a rectangular space. Attacker is the blue and can only move along the line. They can only pass through the line and can only receive at the corners. A defender in red tries to steal the ball. The person with the ball must always have 2 pass options. Therefore, the attacker without the ball needs to pay attention and run to the empty space in order to be a pass option for attacker with ball possession. It is common for attackers without the ball to stand and without paying attention to whether or not they are a pass option. So you see, I've modified the game here to emphasize that who is not with the ball needs to move and appear to be an option to receive. Now you all can see an example that we use here in a class for children of invasion games. So the kid without the ball must run into the corners and give option for the attacker, the other player with the ball. And the defender tries to get the ball back. So we change the game, the invasion games here to emphasize this only thing. It's what David talked before about keeping possession of the ball. So this is the problem, the tactical problem here that we try to focus on. So this is what we call game exaggeration. So here is my part here. Thank you very much. And I pass for Next person. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Guy. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, on the topic 3, we are gonna be covering question and reflection. So game-based approach uses questioning technique to guide students to solve practical problem rather than providing them answer. So the cognitive process that you are guiding the student on are very important, not only for gaining knowledge, but also improving the performance. Next slide, please. The question, reflection, and dialogue provide opportunity for students collaborating and testing ideas. It is important to ask open and divergent questions to stimulate student thinking, dialogue, and reflection. Teachers and coaches can ask questions when, number 1, during the flow of the lesson, which is sideline, such as sideline teaching. Number 2, during planned stoppage, such as breaks. Number 3, natural stoppage, such as throw-ins or ball out of play. And number 4, in the situation or moment, such as using a freeze technique. So teachers can also stop a game and prompt students within their groups to discuss and debate aspects of the games before returning back into the game to act upon of the discussion. Next slide, please. Here is the example of teachers questioning during the 3v3 volleyball lesson. Again, the key is to guide students and players through the problem-solving process. Next slide, please. So in order to ask effective questions, here are 4 keys. Number 1, stay focused on the topic. Number 2, follow-up questions is important. Number 3, make students think and let them know that it is okay to have various answers. And then number 4, if you ask yes or no question, follow up with why and how question. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm actually gonna pass on to the next person for topic 4.
Thank you, Kanae. Thank you, Jennie, for the kind introduction. Good evening from Italy. I'm Francesco, and I will introduce to you this slide for presenting topic 4, authentic gameplay assessment. More details about this relevant topic will be provided in the related webinar that is organized by Professor Suzuki and me. Assessment is a relevant part of teaching and coaching process. To be effective, assessment needs to be formative. It doesn't simply measure students or player performances, but it has to help students to improve it. Moreover, to be really authentic in connection with GBAs application, assessment used by teachers or coaches need to assess gameplay skills within the game's context. It is really important, and it is a difference in front of skill-based approach, as Sanmuga said before. Assessment needs to assess also tactical awareness, and assessment needs to account for the social dimension of the game. Next slide, please, Jennie. Thanks. From a sport pedagogy perspective, an authentic assessment of GBA-related teaching or coaching process can be connected with one or more of Bloom's dimensions of learning. These dimensions, as shown in image, are psychomotor, are affective, are cognitive. Accordingly, in the next slides, we will provide to you with an overview of some approaches useful for assessing learning and performances related to each one of these dimensions. Next slide, please, Jennie. For what concern the assessments of learning related to the psychomotor domain, we will introduce to you two of the most used approaches. The first is the team sport assessment procedure, developed by the French School of Sport Pedagogy in 1997. This approach permits to assess on-the-board skills and has been validated for several team games and sports, such as soccer, basketball, volleyball, and hockey. When we use this approach, data are recorded according to the performance introduced by each player when he/she can play the ball. Then these data are used for estimating two indexes: the volume of play, which means the level of involvement of each student, and the efficiency index, which measures the ability to produce effective skills. By using a normograph, as the one shown in the slide, we can combine these indexes to produce an overall score performances called performance score. Next slide, please. The second tool we present to you is the Game Performance Assessment Instrument, developed by Mitchell and Oslin. This tool permits to observe and code performances behaviors that demonstrate the ability to solve tactical problems by making decisions, by moving appropriately, and by executing skills. To do that, each teacher can build a personal schema by combining 3 or more of the 7 gameplay components of which GPI is composed of. These components are 3 for scoring phases and 4 for preventing scoring phases. 2 different strategies can be used to apply this approach. The first is the use of Likert scale code, and the second is the tally system. If a teacher or a coach choose the second, he can record the data and he can identify 2 global indexes of performance: the game involvement and the game performance score. Of course, much detail and examples on the use of these tools will be provided in the related webinar. Next slide, Jennie, please. For assessing the cognitive learning domain, we will discuss about 2 different tools. The first is the use of scenarios developed to assess the ability of students to solve specific tactical problems related to the teaching or coaching process. The second is questionnaires developed and sometimes validated for assessing 2 different typologies of knowledge: the declarative tactical knowledge and the procedural tactical knowledge. Next slide, please. Last but not least, GBAs has an impact on the affective domain of learning, which means assessing how GBA affect cooperation, skill, good sporting behavior, team working attitudes, level of enjoyment, and the level of perceived competencies. All these aspects are influenced by game condition and by game context. Therefore, for us, it's needed to assess these elements with specific tools, with specific strategies, with specific methods to obtain a global authentic assessment related to the effect of GBAs on player performances or in students' progression of learning. Thank you very much, and I pass the words to the other presenter.
Thank you, Francisco. So on the final day of this webinar series, we will talk about lesson plan. So what do GBA lesson plan and the practice actually look like? What component should you include in your plan? How can you modify your lesson or practice plan based on your teaching or coaching situation? So these are the questions that will be answered in the webinar series. Next slide, please. So these are the basic components of the game-based approach lesson plan. Again, this is just a basic, and we will talk more about how you modify your lesson plan based on your students on the last session of that webinar series. Next slide, please. So now we will open up to the floor for questions. I have already seen a few questions on the chat. So let's start from the questions on the chat, if it's okay with everyone. So the first question we received, thank you, from Farihan, is some parties said that there is no need pedagogy elements, which is indirect teaching, to train players in coaching context. Is it enough to do small-sided games with minimum instruction from coach? What your opinion is about? What do you all think, those presenters? Anybody?
I can.
Guy, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start. Yes, well, what I think about this is that I don't believe in an absolute truth. So in teaching, there doesn't seem to be a magic formula to teach. Each contest will demand a method which must be developed by the teacher or the coach. So what we present here today is some common things of game-based approach, which can inspire you to build your own practice. So this is what I think. Each contest demands some specific strategy to teach. So this is what I think about this.
Thank you, Guy. Any other opinions or thoughts? Okay, again, I think we can, that's a very good question, and we can discuss more about this when we talk more depth into the topic for the following series. So I am gonna move on to the next question is, when we want to conduct a lesson by using game-based approaches, how we want to address and assign the student into certain groups according to their skills and cognitive levels without letting them down? That's another very good question. What do you all think? David, do you want to start?
Yeah. Well, hello. In my opinion, firstly, what we need to know is that game-based approach is, we are in the same situation that in all physical education settings or approaches. So we are facing same problems. But in this case, we have more instruments for this kind of grouping. For example, we can modify games not only for the full group, but we can modify by giving some handicaps to certain students, so they can compete together, both face-to-face or in the same groups. So it's much more easier to keep groups with different levels of students. But how not let down students when you are grouping? That's not game-based approach issue. specifically, but it's physical education. But in that case, my opinion is that first thing we have to do is that students need to know what's their level and what's the purpose of physical education in general or our coaching. So it's to improve your own level. You have to face and you have to know and you have to accept your level. I think we don't have to worry about if they think they are better or worse. They already know. They need to know that they can improve, and game-based approach have more elements or tools to do so in an effective and equity context.
Thank you, David. Anybody else wants to add to it? Thank you, David. The next question is from Corey, that what are some ways that practitioners can address the affective domains of learning during the game-based approaches?
I can reply to this question.
Sure, Francesco, please.
Okay, thank you very much for a very, very interesting question. Core depends on the element that you want to address during your lesson. For example, if your interest is on the level of enjoyment, you can use some questionnaires, for example, the pages, for addressing this element related to the affective domain. For other elements such as perceived competencies, there are a lot of instruments for assessing during physical education or the outsport context. For the others, such as sportsmanship, for example, you can develop not standardized instruments such as rubric or self-compiled diary for recording how they change their opinion about sport, about fair play, fair coaching, or other elements related to effective aspects of application of GBAs. That's it.
Thank you, Francisco. Anybody else wants to add to that? David? No?
Well, I think just small. There's some proposals. I don't remember the name. It's from Canada. There's in the same way we are talking about some questioning about what's happening in the game, about what you have to decide or think or understand about the game. There is some proposals about affective questioning. So because during the game is a lot of affection, feelings that are in play too, if you allow me to that expression, and to do some questioning when during the game and after it is very important how to feel, because normally we have to deal with a lot of feelings with kids and in the games. What happens if I don't get the ball? What happens if what I'm thinking when I don't pass the ball to other, even if they are in the better position, but I want the ball for me. So it is a lot of feeling about. So to understand that kind of feelings and to develop good affective questioning is also a good way to address the affective domain.
Yes, most certainly. And I think we can dive more into the depth when we are covering the questioning and the reflection on the following seminar too. That was a great question. Thank you. The next question we have on the chat is how we want to manage the pessimism thought properly among coaches or teachers in order to use game-based approaches. That's another good question.
Okay, I can take this question.
Yes, Sanmuga, please.
Okay, we can highlight the previous research finding about the versus pedagogy, the traditional versus the game-based approach. Findings indicating that enjoyment level improve as well as tactical decision-making improve via game-based approach. Only the skill development, there is no significant findings between the traditional and GBA. But generally, GBA, especially TGfU, seems to be a superior model in teaching game. So can be proven by the research findings. How effective is GBA? Right, that's my take.
Yeah, most certainly. Anybody else wants to add to Sanmuga?
I can add something. Very
Sure.
interesting question here today. All the questions here. So this is I faced this pessimism in some space here from teachers and coaches in club here. So in sports club. So in fact, I think that the question is not whether if the coach like or dislike the method, but they have to understand what they want to teach. So understand what beginners need to learn to do in order to play. So, and usually it's not just a technical thing. We have to add technical and tactical thinking. It's in sports like invasion games or in net and wall games, for example, the technical thing is not apart from what we of the tactical thing. So we need to add the how to do it and what to do it. So these two things are together. So when teachers understand this, they probably will change the way they teach, and probably use some or inspire. We will inspire in game-based approach. This is what I think.
Thank you very much, Guy. And the next question we have on the chat is from Victoria. How can you introduce GSA with big groups of students, like 40 students in the physical education lesson?
I can answer this.
Go ahead. Sure.
Okay.
Please.
Hello, Victoria. I guess you mean game-based approach, GBA. I think it's, again, we have more ways to use in physical education, because firstly, we are using small games, which allow us that in a small space, the kids are playing. So let's get an example. If we have normally in Spain, at least in Spain, we have like a handball team court for physical education most of the times. So if we have 40 students and we are grouping them in 5 groups of 8, we have a 4 versus 4 game. So we have to work in the white, no, in transversal way in the court, no longitudinal, like in 2 walls. So we have small goals, we have 5 courts, we have 4 versus 4. Depending on the game, if we are playing with soccer with our feet, normally we will not have space enough in this area. We need more space for football, because we need to see the space in order to understand the problems and to solve them. So probably you need to get 3 versus 3 top. So you can have, again, more instruments from game-based approach. So these 2 that are not actually currently playing will be assessing, coaching, or recording in some way. So we have more instruments and tools to introduce all the kind of knowledge, to develop different kind of knowledge, because it's not only the practical knowledge, but you have a lot of different activities or proposals in the GBA books. So I guess you have more, it's more easy that to have a full group in a technical or traditional way, and at the same time they're all the time playing, because they have small groups, but they have their space. And the teacher need to go from one group to another and not stop the full group, which normally we do in physical education. So again, we have, it's easier to deal with big groups in physical education.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. So then next question we had is regarding to the affective domain of teaching. That I think a follow-up question is, how can we go beyond the feelings? So how can we practically introduce concept of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion to students using a GBA? I can tackle this. Thank you, Corey. We actually covered this topic too in the other webinar. And then using the questioning technique part, that GBA can actually promote and then include that justice, equity, diversity, inclusion concept into your teaching. In addition to teaching the tactical concept of the games. So we can dive into more of this in the later webinar series, but I think that the easy, simple question answer for this is to using the questioning, the guiding technique, as well as modifying the games based on what you want to accomplish. So if the inclusion is important for your lesson, then you may be able to modify your games and modify the rules, or asking students think about coming up the rules. How ask questions to the student that how can we modify rules so everyone feels feel included or something, and then have your student come up with the answers. Sometimes students come up with the answer such as all the team players needs to touch the ball before take a shot in soccer game or something like that. So I think that there's certainly the way to promote the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion into game-based approaches. Thank you, everyone. I think that is the last question that we had in the chat. So if anybody else have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and then speak up.
I was just going to add, Joy Butler has a great book called Playing Fair that talks about more of that. Sorry, and I lost the chat box here. So that talks more about that inclusive and engaging students in the conversation of inclusion and justice and making sure everyone feels like they're a part of the game and whatnot. So anyways, just another thing there. But
yes, that was great information. Definitely, that we can definitely put that in the chat or something. Yeah. So that concludes this first of that webinar series of this topic. First, thank you for those presenters that presenting for the 5 basic components of game-based approaches. Thank you for the presenters, and then thank you for all of you who are joining us today for this today's webinar. So we are gonna have 3 following webinars coming up, and the next seminar will be the September 24th, and you will receive about that information soon from the TGfU. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone to joining us today, and have a great night, evening, good morning, or great day. And then once again, thank you everyone. Look forward to seeing you all next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.